Honorable Commissioner, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. My name is Aula Europe and I'm a student at the International Relations and Diplomacy Studies program. And on behalf of the Nordic and Baltic students here at the college, it is with great pleasure that I can say good morning and welcome to this conference on small states in the European Union, during which we will be joined by two distinguished speakers, Andris Piebalgs, Commissioner for Development, and Poul Christoffersen, Ambassador of Denmark to Belgium. This is the very first of events that will take place during the Nordic Baltic National Week, a week which we hope will provide you with some insights into our region. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to promote another one of our events, namely our sauna night on Wednesday, where every department has to form teams to compete on who could conquer the North. You can keep yourself updated on these events on our Facebook page, where you will also find more background information about the Nordic Baltic region. Because this region is a highly interesting one. Put in perspective, when compared to neighbors such as Germany and not least Russia, the region is comprised of relatively small states, at least population-wise. Hence the theme of today. The region has also been through a period of intense transformation during the last decades, and here I'm thinking especially on the independence of the Baltic states approximately 2 decades ago. Furthermore, there are different patterns of membership in international organizations such as the EU and NATO, which also generates a specific dynamic. However, despite this diversity, there is much more that brings us together than what separates us. Many of you probably know about corporations such as the Nordic Council and the Baltic Assembly, but the joint Nordic Baltic Corporation is also a well-established one. We have, for example, the NB8, which is a network of meetings in a multitude of constellations, including ministerial meetings and meetings for civil servants on issues such as foreign policy, security, and defense. Also here at the college, we, the Nordic and Baltic students, have established a strong cooperation and, let me also say, a sincere friendship. We have worked together in a positive spirit to make this week a reality, with the generous support of our sponsors. So, on behalf of the Nordic Baltic Society, as we have come to call ourselves, I am therefore very pleased to introduce to you our first speaker of today. His Excellency, Mr. Christoffersen, has a very fascinating background. He is, as mentioned, Denmark's ambassador to Belgium, but before that he worked as a special advisor to High Representative Catherine Ashton in setting up the External Action Service. He has also been Denmark's EU ambassador and prepared the negotiations for the 2004 and 2007 enlargement. And as if this wasn't enough, Mr. Christoffersen is also a college alumnus from the Coudenhofer Kalergi promotion, and he also won Alumni of the Year award in 2003. Mr. Christoffersen will speak on the topic Foot Dragging Danes or Constructive Partner in the EU. So please, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to speak at my old college. Denmark joined the EU 40 years ago. I was a student at this college 40 years ago, so both Denmark and myself are celebrating a 40th anniversary. It was a very different college at the time. We were, I think, about 60 students, all lived down in St. Jakobsstraat. Quite a lot of us got married between us, about 25% of the promotion. Including myself, so I have lasting memories of the College of Europe. But of course this is not the theme of today. Rather, I will talk about the 40 years of Denmark in the European Union and the experience which I have learned from that. First of all, I think when we joined the EU in 1973, it was a marriage of convenience more than a marriage of love. It was for mainly economic reasons. Denmark had one big economic problem during the 50s and the 60s, and that was that our market was split between the two market groupings in the EU. Our biggest export markets were the UK, Sweden, and Germany. And UK and Sweden were in EFTA, and Germany was in the EC. So we had a problem for our economics. And that was really what drove, I would say, the enlargement process and why we entered into the European Union. So talks about the peace between people and things like that, hardly mentioned in the referendum. The whole political aspect of being part of the European Union was basically neglected in our adhesion. And I think we came to pay for that negligence later on when the more political aspects of participation in the European Union became more obvious. This being said, I think, at least from an economic point of view, Danish membership of the European Union has been a big success. Because we did obtain what we set out to obtain, the one big market for our export products. We had, as the Union developed, the internal market, which again was a huge advantage to a small economy, so you don't have to adapt to 26 or 27 different standards when you export, but can have one community standard. It was also very important to us that the internal market, which was created, was not a closed internal market. When we were discussing the internal market back in the beginning of the 80s, there was the fear, sometimes suspicion from the outside, that what Europe was about to create would be a closed shop, a fortress Europe as far as trade is concerned. This turned out not to be the case, and that again was something which Denmark really wanted, that the European Union should be a promoter of international trade and openness in markets around the world. And I think this really has been the case. I would say that today the European Union is probably the most open market in the world, and is probably also the only genuine proponent of truly free markets globally. So we got the market which we wanted to. We, as I said, when we joined, it was basically the market that interested us. But over time, a number of policies, of course, were developed inside the European Union. And if I look back at all the policies which we have developed over this span of time, internal market, environment, research, consumer protection, education and training, energy and climate, they have basically been what we wanted the European Union to do. And I also think, and that's a question about influence, that we have ourselves been able to leave footprints in the way these policies have developed. I could also include development policy, which when we joined the European Union back in '73 was basically what existed of development policy was a policy towards the former colonies of the member states. It was not a very modern development policy, but I think we have seen development of development policy which really has been in the direction which we have wanted the development to go. Also, if we are looking forward and take, for instance, the Europe 2020, it could have been written by a Dane. I mean, what you have in the 2020 program is like a Danish wish list on how we want to see society develop in Europe. We have also been a very staunch promoter of enlargement, and the honor and the chance of being in the having the chairmanship of the presidency of the European Union in 2002, when the big enlargement was decided. by the way, it was also during the Danish presidency 10 years earlier that we had fixed the criteria for membership, the so-called Copenhagen criteria for membership, which are still today used as the yardstick for the requirements which you need to fulfill if you want to become a member of the European Union. On issues like foreign and security policy, Denmark was extremely skeptical in the beginning about seeing the development of a foreign and security policy in the European Union. And we certainly didn't want that foreign and security policy to be mixed in any way with normal community policies. Today, I think that we can say that Denmark has become one of the greatest proponents of combining community policies and foreign and security policy. The so-called comprehensive approach is something which to which we really attach a lot of importance. We also feared in the beginning that a European foreign and security policy would become a security and foreign policy which would weaken the transatlantic ties, would put up barriers vis-à-vis our close allies, the United States. Again, we were mistaken, and the way the things developed were again basically the way we wanted that to develop. So, all in all, I would say that I think Denmark has been more successful than almost all other member states in getting the European Union, which we really want. If you make a scorecard on what we have obtained compared to, for instance, the French scorecard or the German scorecard, I think we come out better than they do. France certainly would not have wished this free market openness towards the world, which we have been promoting. Also, one thing which we have been rather against in the European Union development is to promote a very binding social policy in the European Union. We wanted a great degree of freedom for member states in social areas, and again, that is what we have achieved. I think that we have played a certain role ourselves in bringing about this result to get the European Union that we wanted. I must say that after having had now an experience with the European Union lasting for at least 35 years, I am constantly surprised on how much a small member state can influence things in Brussels. We are fortunately still living in a European Union where good ideas, a well-argued case, still count as much as the size of the member state. I think a lot of people believe that the European Union is basically run by France and Germany. And of course it is also true that France and Germany have influenced the way in which the European Union has developed. But at least seen from a Danish perspective, the compromise which France and Germany have reached has actually been a compromise which suited us very well. You had the Germans which promoted the free, the open market, the free enterprise aspect of the European Union. You had the French which assured that in institutional terms the member states still had a very important role to play in the construction of the European Union, and that was a balance which suited us very well. I also think that there is, from time to time, an exaggeration in the conception of what French-German steering of Europe means. Because very often, at least that has been my experience, France and Germany can agree on the headings. We want to do this, but they have very often great difficulties in agreeing on the substance, the real substance. And that gives you a playing field as a small member state, where you can maneuver things in a direction which really suits yourself. And I think this we have been able to do quite a lot. There's also another aspect of sort of influence of small member states, and that is the influence of providing the example. When, for instance, the Commission is trying to find out how to construct a policy, they are very often looking around in the circle and see where do you have successful national experiences in one field or the other. And I think, for instance, to take example like development policy, or again to take Andris Piebalgs' former area of competence, energy policy, that we have actually been able to use the European Union to promote Danish policies on a broader scale. For instance, during the Danish presidency, there was an agreement on a very important piece of new legislation on energy efficiency. And if you look down in the list of things which member states are supposed to do, you do actually find quite a lot of Danish ideas which then are promoted to a European scale. Now, of course, this is an extremely rosy picture of what we have obtained and what membership has meant to Denmark. And I'm not sure that that rosy picture will necessarily be shared by all Danes. We also have this image of not being a very pro-European country. I'm not sure it's true. If, for instance, you look at the Europe barometers, which appear every 3 or 4 months, where you measure how the citizens look at the European construction. If you take the last one, from December 2002, there were only 33% of the citizens in Europe that expressed trust in the EU. 67% had doubt or were outright negative. Denmark was one of the very few countries where you have a positive image which is bigger than the negative image. The Danish figures are 48.4 and 42% on the negative side, and about 10% don't know. Still, as I said, there is this notion of Danes being foot-dragging in European terms. And I think it partly stems back from the early history of Danish membership of the European Union, where we were always against further progress towards more European integration, and in particular towards more institutional integration and towards more integration on political aspects. And then, of course, it also stems from the fact that it was Denmark that opened the bad habit of rejecting European treaties. We rejected, to the surprise of the whole political establishment in Denmark, the Maastricht Treaty when it was put to a referendum in 1992. We have been a very active negotiator in the Maastricht negotiations. We have the whole parliament behind us in this very pro-European agenda which was on the table, but the people said no. Consequence was that in order to provide the basis for another referendum in Denmark, we had to introduce certain opt-outs from a number of community policies. Decided to stay already at that time outside the euro. We had an opt-out from everything which is linked to defense with regard to the common foreign and security policy, and we decided to stay outside communitarization of home and justice affairs. That was 20 years ago, and we have been living with those opt-outs for 20 years. Nobody thought that when these opt-outs were introduced 20 years ago, that they would last for 20 years. I think most people thought that this was a necessary condition to move further, and we would then get rid of those opt-outs in the course of a short period of time. This has not been the case. And again, also, despite the fact that these opt-outs do not correspond at all to what Danish policy is in general. Take the euro. We are not a member of the euro, but we have fixed exchange rates vis-à-vis the euro. What does this combination mean? It means that we have basically no autonomy as far as our monetary policy is concerned. Whatever is decided in Frankfurt is replicated shortly after that by the Danish National Bank. And I have a personal story. I once had a meeting with the Danish bank governor in the morning when Frankfurt was deciding a change in the exchange rates. That was going to happen around 10 o'clock. My meeting was between 9:30 and 10:30. When we got to 10 o'clock, the central bank governor said, well, it was a lady, by the way, that she just had to leave the room for about 10 minutes. She left the room for the 10 minutes, and then the whole Danish monetary policy was directed to what had been decided in Frankfurt. So I now know that the Danish autonomy, as far as monetary policy is concerned, lasts about 10 minutes. Security and defense. The kind of security and defense actions which the European Union is undertaking today are very much the kind of actions which we would like to have undertaken by someone. Take, for instance, for the moment, one of the important defense action or military action undertaken by the European Union is protection of shipping in the Indian Ocean, the so-called Atalanta action. About 10% of the tonnage that crosses through the waters under protection by Atalanta flies Danish flags or is owned by Danish ship owners. So it's clear we have a very concrete national interest in that action. Also that it is an effective action, and the Atalanta action is an effective action, I would say even more than the parallel action being undertaken by NATO. On home and justice affairs, we are a member of H.E.M, which means that basically everything which is decided in Brussels has to be replicated in Danish law. So I think from all points of view, these opt-outs have no real basic reason except for political reason. And except for the fact that in order to get rid of them, you need a Danish referendum. We tried once more, as far as the euro was concerned, in the year 2000 and failed. And I think that everybody would agree that today is not the time to have another referendum in Denmark. So we have to live with a situation where Denmark, at least for some period of time, will continue to stay outside the euro. I think we have managed to live with Danish opt-out for 20 years without really being relegated to a corner in European integration. I still do believe that Denmark is basically considered as being a fairly mainstream and relative to our size, a fairly influential member of the European Union. Question is whether this will last. And there I have maybe my preoccupations. There are two things which are happening, I think, which will influence also the way in which Denmark will place itself in European integration in the coming years. One, of course, is the euro crisis and the reinforcement of economic governance which that involves. The other thing is the position of the United Kingdom. I think it will be much more difficult in the years to come to play the game which to some extent we have been playing until now, which is partly be inside and partly be outside. I think we will be coming to a period where you will be asked to declare your cards in a more concrete way than what has been the case until now. And I do see maybe 4 groups of member states sort of appearing on the horizon. You have the Eurogroup, 17 members of the Eurogroup. You have those which I will call the pre-ins, those who are not yet members of the Eurogroup, but do intend to join the Eurogroup. You have those who are sitting on the fence and looking around and see what happens and don't take a position one way or the other on this until they know in what direction the European Union is going. And then you have the United Kingdom, plus potentially 1 or 2 countries. I'm quite certain that Denmark is not in the United Kingdom camp. We are not yet members of the Eurogroup integrated, but my own personal and firm conviction is that we have to try to place ourselves as being a coming member of the banking union with or without the Swedes. And then I think my time is up. Let's take the rest of the
Thank you, Mr. Christoffersen, for a very insightful speech. It is now my honour and pleasure to present our next speaker, Andris, the Commissioner for Development Aid. Mr. Piebalgs is currently also a member of the UN High Panel on the Post-Millennium Development Goals Agenda Beyond 2015. He's a member of the UN High-Level Group on sustainable energy for all. Before taking the development portfolio, Andris Piebalgs was the Commissioner for Energy during the first Barroso Commission. His significant contribution to the energy policy stood behind his nomination as the Eurocrat of the Year 2007 by The Economist, and his nomination for the Diamond Prize from the Regional Chamber of Commerce in Katowice in Poland. Additionally to the fact that the Commissioner Piebalgs comes from Latvia, one of the smaller EU member states, it will be our greatest pleasure to listen to his insights on the challenges and opportunities that a small EU member state faces in the EU, given that he had a central crucial role in shaping Latvia's role in the EU, also during his time in office as the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Relations to the EU. So, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Commissioner Piebalgs.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. For me, it is the first time at the College of Europe. I heard actually about the College of Europe a bit in the previous cabinet. I think most of members of my cabinet have at one or another time have studied in the College of Europe, and I think now it's 33% of my cabinet, but it's rather small, so that means that it's 2 of 6. So it's not the biggest number, but I would assume basically in the European Commission, if I see the cabinets, particularly where the young people are in, the most of them has been here. So I assume some of you will also have a chance also to work for the European Commission. Well, actually trying to first coming here to think what means small EU member country. And I think the answer would be all are small who are not big. Since the question, who are the big EU member countries? And the answer perhaps is the countries that could shape EU policy or create EU policy. And that gives me 3 countries in the past, 2 in present. When I got the job on Energy Commissioner, it was definitely not perspective portfolio, because energy was seen very much as a national domain. And speaking about Europe in energy was completely impossible. Well, crisis came later. But the shaping moment have been Hampton Court European Council that was chaired by Tony Blair. And that's the first time in the paper he proposed European energy networks. As it was British that proposed European energy network, so no one had the courage to object towards it. And that actually was the start of European energy policy. It was as simple, I think, as that. The second is definitely France. When there have been difficulty with Lisbon Treaty ratification, well, it was Sarkozy that found the formula for next round of ratification and brought out of the difficulties that Europe has had. And if I see now for stabilization mechanism, H.E.M, it was Germany that basically has driven the shape of it. So I would say that these 3 countries have basically been big countries, not dominating countries, but the countries that could make a historical impact of the EU well-development. In a way, UK is bringing it again, because what Cameron said, we should see also not necessarily from the negative point of view, because there are a couple of issues that definitely I would disagree with you, but there is one issue, how to behave being big, well, relatively big economy in the situation where don't you belong to Eurozone. And I don't know the answer. He excluded that UK could be Switzerland or Norway. But there is no other formula that I know, at this stage at least. And that I would expect from both sides, from the other EU member countries, from UK, to try to build new relation formula. So in a way, it's again driving the EU policy, because you can't take it if not noticed. So that leaves me that all other 24 are small member countries. In some issues they play some role, but all other 24 basically are shaping the policies to defend national interests. So basically founding fathers have some provision, and then some countries have driven the policies, and most of them always have built the policy to defend the national interests. And I think there is some risks built in, because part of what you call Euroscepticism is definitely built if you defend national interests all the time, then you get a perception, instinctive perception, that you face enemy somewhere, in Brussels or whatever, because it sounds not logical that you need to defend the national interests. So I think it is very clear that we have reached of the point where unions should somehow try to respond to a couple of challenges. But I will try to define it on the basis of some experience of Latvia. Because Latvia, in a way, being a small country, joining in only 2004, and Poul Skytte Christoffersen was very important in this process as a person as well. So in preparing and helping to really to shape the policy, but also in the last round of negotiations. Well, partially he's still responsible for this mess with agriculture, because he has not courage or support really to find the better formula of it. But it's very clear that Latvia is a good example. Why it is so, and I will come to this, I think the challenge that you can learn on Latvia's example, because you could definitely make a parallel with other countries. Well, I would say the period until 96, end of 96, is very chaotic in Latvia. Regaining independence with high expectations, and then it's going down because economic difficulties nobody has anticipated. So the spirits are high. When you make a revolution, the revolution is over, well, you try to find who is responsible if things are not going so well. And in this particular period of history, I would call that the risks have been immense that Latvia could be failed state. If you look on the former Soviet Union countries, well, you could tell today that actually success stories, well, relative success, only three. It's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. All others have not at least taken the smallest part of the potential that these countries have. Well, perhaps it's rather rough or rude for me to say, but I definitely believe or from human rights issues, or from economic issues, or any other countries could have done better. So that means that this end of 96 was very crucial. But I would say that by that time we got, as a nation, some type of irritation that Estonia has been recognized as candidate country, Latvia was not. And until that moment, we did not care too much as a nation. And when somebody said, no, you are not doing as well, then immediately everybody got excited and started to really to think that or we have been unfairly treated, but we should change it as soon as possible. So 97-2004 was basically supported by population process where we have driven our legislation attitudes towards EU more. Sometimes with a lot of screams, sometimes with some resistance, particularly in customs administration. That was the last, actually, bastion that fall. We have had some particularities that if you have cameras, it's natural phenomenon for a couple of years. You have these observation cameras where customs people work. And lightning strike all the time at the same place. So they changed the place of camera and still lightning came again. But I think 97-2004 perhaps was one of the best periods of Latvia because you have a drive, you have expectation, you have some natural resistance, but it was very clear policy drive. And still, by the end of 2003, and I was at that time while participating in supporting joining EU, it was far from clear that people will vote for the participation in the EU. And that, I think, is where the small countries are faced this dilemma. From one side, you see, well, opportunities. From other side, you are afraid to be dominated. Always you are afraid, scared to be dominated by others. Germans, French, whomever, Brussels, I think it's more broadly called Brussels dominated. And the results definitely have been by far better than anybody expected. We have 67% in favor. I think opinion polls gave shortly before just more than 50%, hardly 50%. So we have got very strong support, but based on what peace and stability, 40% said, well, if in euro, perhaps you can easily be more. With Russia, 46 said, well, economy could be better, and 48% by that time said, well, Latvia is just too small to survive in these storms of the world. But it was mostly, I think, still dominated of security concern. And then if I see what happened later in objective figures, it's quite impressive. Politically, Latvia made an agreed on a Russia-ratified border treaty. And I would assume that if Latvia would be outside, we still would have pending border issues. We have had last year a very crucial referendum on the future of the country that is a second state language. And that was, again, you never know, well, you would assume that there will be a lot of conflicts because we have quite substantial Russian population in the country, and you would expect rather close results. But the result was 75% is for only one state language, is Latvian. And I would say why I believe that for Latvia it is right now. Well, you are a small country with small culture, with rather small language using group. And at the end you have a country with 150 million population. If you don't take one state language, basically the country has no future. You can't expect that you will that you could resist the forces that will try to split countries into two. I understand that this process will be complicated, but I think it's out of the table. So it's very clear to demonstrate Latvia's future, where it goes. So I would say what we have passed through in this EU, it's more, self-confidence, and definitely by far more security. Today, only 14% would recognize that there is something with security with the EU, because the confidence came down. Economic, it's also interesting. 2004, we have 4,887 euro per capita. In 2011, 9,871 euros. So it's doubled in a rather short period of time, and I'm speaking the figures after the crisis. And we have improved also relatively from 46% in 2004 over from average. Now it's 58%. And I was always quite surprised that with all the structural fund support to Greece was always never has managed this relative gap. Because it's very clearly inside the EU, there are forces that help you to come closer to average because you are integrated in the economy. Well, experts to the EU has had 187% increase, it's 72% of total, and by value 6.79 billion euro. Just to give some comparison, to Russia is 1.12 billion euro. So that would mean that basically economic growth is extremely impressive. Now social security, because that I would say, it was 128% increase. Overall it's 2 billion euro. Pensions increased by 155%. On average, now it's 255 euro. Well, there you could question, is it high or not enough? Because I came from Burundi, one of the poorest countries in the world, and doctor's salary where I visit hospital is roughly 250 euros. My wife's salary in hospital in the intensive care is roughly 800 euros. But just to demonstrate that, well, it's not high figures that you speak about. But still, from the point where you started, it's definitely very impressive increase. And you could also clearly take a comparison about the impact of the support from EU, because the funding has, since 2004, it's 5.7 billion euro funding that came into the Latvian economy. How it was used? Well, it would be different stories, but the good news, we have never, I think, heard any serious story of corruption. And that is also something impressive that was achieved, I think, in this crucial period, 1997-2004, that basically this evil of corruption at least was diminished to the scale that, well, it has not such a real impact on it. At the same time, so the figures are impressive, working well. There are two weaknesses, and I'll come to them to this. One was a shocking crisis that we got in 1 year, less than 18% of GDP loss. Well, you could always argue you should be more prudent, but that's definitely why the shock way towards each and every citizen of Latvia. It's similar to Greece or similar to some other EU countries, but it was hard landing. It was very, very hard landing particularly for people that got their salaries from state budget or depending also from the pension. So it was one weakness. And another weakness that still persists, it is unemployment rate. Extremely, it's still two-digit. I think it's now 14% roughly. And that was always very hard. And I think these two weaknesses definitely affected what I would say perception. In 2009, during the crisis, only 23% of Latvians said that membership is a good thing, and 55% that Latvia has not benefited. In 2012, only 38% trust EU institutions. At the same time, they recognize that EU means freedom to travel, study, and work. So these were the only arguments that were now positive, much related. Now we are facing another interesting challenge. It is in 2014, I expect that Latvia will join the euro. But domestically, 71% in December was against, 26% are for. In January 2013, it's slight improvement, now 33%, 1/3 is in favor. At the same time, 2/3 of loans in euro and half of deposits are in euro. Something is not matching. You would say you trust euro as a currency, because if you would kept all money in Lats, I would say fine. But knowing also that Latvian currency is, well, basically pegged to euro, and at the same time you would not like physical introduction in euro. And on the notes that we have, there is no queen, beloved queen, or beloved king. Well, it's rather, well, nice signs, but nothing particular that I would say you would find on the note. So there is something that definitely demonstrates that there is decoupling between economic and political benefits and perception. And it's not that government has not tried to explain euro, and I think they did a fantastic job because we avoided active resistance against euro. But still, I would prefer that it would be more positive attitude, because if you are not resisting, basically you're saying it's not too bad, but I should not be too much involved with it. And it comes very clearly, I think, the highest point why it is this two-way perception, small country towards the EU, in multi-annual financial framework. In multi-annual financial framework, strangely enough, Latvia's national interests have been mostly around 2 points, but only one really matters, at least for perception. It was direct subsidies to farmers. Direct subsidies for farmers, and I think we have 4% farmer population, nothing very significant, you would say. Also agriculture GDP, 2% or 3%, not important issue whatsoever. Why people fall for it? Well, as in Soviet times, the agricultural system was not very efficient. When we joined EU, basically the subsidies was given on the basis of previous data, and they could be just bad, extremely bad. So we ended up that for the same hectare, in Latvia you got 4 times less or 3 times less than in the Netherlands. Definitely farmers made a mess out of it because they claimed some things that they should not claim, but for people, normal people, it was like a manifestation of injustice. Justice means that each farmer in the EU gets the same money for support. And as long as it's not, it's perceived that there is some scheme behind it that somehow tries, doesn't make all countries equal. And you can explain as long why it was so. But the question is, why can't you change now? The things have changed. This data is not anymore valid. You don't need to base on it, and you build another scheme. But, and there comes the weakness, if you add somebody, somebody should lose. And all countries, others get the lobbies, farmer lobbies, saying no less euro for hectare payment. So you locked in the situation that actually has more political dimension than, well, dimension of really importance, economic importance. And I think you can find a lot of these cases in the EU where the process of European integration, building a lot of compromises around the rather small countries, ends up with a scheme that is not logical, where winners and losers. And if the whole process is a winner process or win-win process, the separate processes are not exactly the same. And the second issue was exactly the same, actually. It was about structural funds and capping. You would always argue who needs to get more money. Well, it's called absorption capacity, but still. Isn't it be so that the countries that are more poor should get more than the more richest? But if you cap by GDP, then basically the more poor that gets less, and the more richest, even with a lower cap, get more. And it's not normal. You would say, well, it's 2%, you should not change the scheme. But each country is defending its interest. So as a result, you make a scheme, it's very difficult to explain. And people ask a normal question, you try to explain, and you need to explain that other countries should have that. And then you say, well, you lost in fighting for your national interests. And I think this is a real challenge in Europe, really how to make a fine type of compromise between real achievements that you can always prove and perceptions that you lost all the time. As a citizen, you lost all the time, and this somehow, until now, no one has really managed to deal with this. Now, if I see the issues ahead of us, I think this political problem needs to be solved, but it goes broader than this, unfortunately. Because Europe is so closely now with identity, with the member countries, that it's difficult to separate. And what we have seen, at least in statistics, that if Europe is unpopular, member countries' governments are not popular as well. And if member countries' governments are in low popularity, Europe is unpopular. So you can't separate this. And this is really very much political credibility issues in national and European elections. How to solve, I have no good answer for it, but it's very clearly that you cannot anymore separate national popularity from European popularity or national unpopularity from European popularity. I think that is one challenge that definitely needs to be solved as soon as the better. The other issue is a process that Paul mentioned a lot, and I think it's very clearly indicates where we should try to achieve better. It's competitiveness of Europe. And I, during the Paul speech, will quote H.E.M, who is our Commissioner for Macroeconomic Issues. During the introduction of 2013 winter forecast, at the end of the day, he allowed himself small deviation, and he said, we must be cautious not to lose our international competitiveness, as we are witnessing, for example, in Finland. which is registering worrying losses of shares in global markets. Investment in Finland has now been declining for 2 years in a row, and this despite financing conditions that are more benign than in other parts of the euro area. And I think it very clearly indicates that a country like, as I would say, exemplary country, it's basically Finland, belongs to Europe, stability, political, economic, everything is there. But if we see that answer for Finland is actually more stronger Europe, you can't find other magical function, because Finland per se can't be doing better, at least in the issues. Perhaps slight improvements could be done somewhere, but it's too small really to make a change of the game. And that means that this integration with banking union, with Eurozone, it is, I think, part of the answer to competitiveness. It's not the only answer, because macroeconomical issues, taxation issues, some others are not sufficient. It's also human development issues, a lot of issues. But I don't see that in nearest future, that main driver in Europe will be Eurozone. And that I personally very strongly believe that Latvia as a small country, for prosperity of my citizens, co-citizens, should be part of Eurozone. If they are out, they will weather more storms. And the crisis that we once had, minus 18%, unfortunately could repeat, perhaps not in the same scale, but still could come back. And we have good chances really to join it with passive support of population. That is, I'm very much regretting it, but still they accept this. They are not trying really to go in the streets of Madrid saying no to Europe, but if you ask, they will be very, very skeptical. It's interesting also to say why they are skeptical, and this is something that sometimes shocks me. Basically, one is not now, perhaps later on. Second is not bad argument saying, well, we have rather lot stability with your national currency. And when the crisis, there have been a lot of people said, well, just make a devaluation and you will live fine. But it was clearly not supported by popular side. It's better cut my salary, don't play with my currency. That I understand emotionally. But the third is, well, why should we pay for Greeks? And that is something that is also need to be taken into account, because perception is we have mastered the crisis and Greeks actually got only bailouts. And when you argue that Latvia also got some bailouts, they say, well, we have already paid the debt. And that, I think, is also some amalgamation of European citizens needed. And I believe that it is only if the labor market is more flexible. Friday, German president, who doesn't have very big influence in German politics, but at the same time is rather strong moral authority. H.E.M. said that we need a common language, English. So here I will stop, so at least we have I addressed you in the common language that was mentioned by H.E.M. Thank you very much, and again, very pleased to be here.
We're now opening the floor to any questions you may have. I'll bring out around the microphone. Anyone wants to start?
Okay. Thank you very much for your very interesting speeches. My name is Elena from Estonia, and I have first question for the Mr. Master, and it's about the euro crisis. As you've been involved in the enlargement process, I was just wondering, what is your take on the euro crisis influence on the enlargement policy, and if that's going to lock in the future enlargement rounds? And as the Commissioner was also referring to those countries less fortunate than the Baltic states, for example, Moldova, do you think that they will fulfill their potential in joining the EU, for example, in the next 10 to 15 years? Or will the euro crisis actually have sort of a disadvantage on them joining? Thank you.
Not an easy question to answer. But to be quite blunt, I think we need to get over the euro crisis before we are able to face other challenges. Then the question is, how and when do we get over the euro crisis? I still think we have some way to go. I think it is essential that we get to the end of the process called the creation of a banking union. We have been talking a lot about the design flaw of the economic and monetary union. The fact that we created an economic and monetary union which was completely integrated on the monetary side and left a lot of leeway as far as economic policy to member states on the other side. So that has led people to say that the default crisis or the real default of the euro is lack of economic integration on the economic side. I basically believe that our main problem, is still on the monetary side. I think it is essential that we go all the way on the monetary side, including on the banking side, and create a full-fledged banking union, including not just common financial oversight and regulation, but also common schemes for dealing with banks that fail. And I would personally like also to see common insurance schemes as far as bank deposits are concerned. Because I think that before we get to the end of that process, the euro is weak. At the same time, I do think that on the economic side, an enormous number of things has happened over the past 2 years. And personally, I don't really see that there is a very strong need for going much further. I don't think, by the way, that it is possible either to obtain political agreement on systems where you would allow a commissioner to overrule national financial laws or things like that, but maybe that's my Danish reflection. So that's how I see the economic and monetary union. I still think we have another 2 or 3 years to go before we get to that point, and until that happens, any ideas of driving the enlargement process beyond those who are beyond Croatia and possibly Serbia, I would say, Macedonia, possibly are very weak.
Like this. So next.
Hello, my name is Donald. I'm from Ireland. I'd like to play a little bit with the wording of the title of this presentation. You've spoken at length about the challenges and opportunities for Denmark and that bit within the Union. As smaller member states, though, my question concerns relations outside the Union, and specifically with the likes of China. Given the size of small member states like Ireland, I guess, as well, do you feel that in maintaining this relationship with China, in developing a partnership, that smaller member states have a role to play bilaterally or multilaterally, or is that distinction too simple? Thank you.
Well, already now I think our program development with China is 30 million euro, and we will go out as the EU because our value added is definitely compared, it's very small. It's a dynamic country, so we don't plan any development activities, neither in China, neither in India, neither in Brazil, and some other Latin American countries that have a lot of challenges, and we don't expect from EU. Because for me, understanding EU should be development aid that member states channels through the EU should be for systemic changes, like in Burundi and particularly in Africa. So because you have 7 years predictability. For Ireland, I would say it's very much Irish sentiment should be, because if there is some emotionally close program for people in China, why not to continue it? I think it's only what depends for EU, because for member countries, I would say the emotional contact is also clear. There could be also some culture programs, some youth programs. So I would not be negative. I wouldn't be negative. And for the cooperation with countries like industrialized countries, because we have so-called partnership instrument. We should crack what does it mean, but it's, in my opinion, strengthening student exchanges, strengthening research cooperation, strengthening working together against climate change, these type of activities that I would anticipate. It's not big program, it is 1 billion altogether. Compared with development aid, it's by far smaller, but not classical development aid, at least from the EU.
Further questions?
Good morning, I'm Vincent from France. Actually, I wanted to ask Mr. Piebalgs if you could elaborate a bit more on what you just said about climate change and development. And especially, my question would be, is it, you think, credible, and how can the EU be credible in linking climate change and development in, for example, developing and poorest nations, especially given that in the Rio +20 outcome, it was written that poverty and fight with poverty shall be the #1 priority, not climate change. So how could the EU, link that? Thank you.
Well, I would say there are two directions. One is definitely to be credible at home. I mean that the EU measures fighting climate change should be effective and visible for partners. I think it's important that this 2020 program is being implemented. It should be also that we have vision for 2030 and afterwards. So I think it's important to keep credibility at home that we are delivering. The second is more interesting. You are right. I read as you read Rio +20 document. And then we came to high-level panel. I thought, and I was very much also focused on eradication extreme poverty, stunted children, access to water, sanitation. Interestingly enough, developing countries in all the scale or representative system, each of them in a way individual capacity, was not too much interested about extreme poverty. So it was some contradiction with Rio +20. Basically, the challenge for the event in New York in September is somehow to bring a roadmap for the international community and the state member countries to address two issues. One is equity, because it is particularly clear, as I understand, it is from Latin America, but also Europe is in it. The richer get more rich, the poorest get more poor, and the gap is widening. And then it comes out as a crime, increased crimes, etc. But disillusion with the society is growing. So how to deal with this equity problems, and that's a related justice and problems. And the other is sustainability. Sustainability is back because most poorest countries most affected by climate change or sustainability issues. So in a way, as I try to present, there are three tasks in this post-2015 agenda. One is still, I'm always insisting, eliminate extreme poverty. Because as I told for stunting children, the children are not responsible that they will not get enough food. They are just not capable to get this food. And some regions as well have no capable themselves to get access to water. So it's still, in my opinion, it is an issue. And if in Burundi you'd say 90% are immunized, 10% aren't. And they have no chance that they will create enough capital to do it. I think it is still extremely crucial that this should be addressed. But at the same time, you need to build a comprehensive roadmap with some goals and indicators that indicates that the world is better on equity and better on sustainability. So like it's overarching. How to make it, I have no, at this stage, clear clue. But it's very clear that we will not come with a proposal just to have a, so-called continuation of MDGs. On Wednesday, Commission will adopt the first step from European response, and I would suggest if you are interested to read it, because it's not still in the details, but it basically says there should be one set of goals. We should not separate development or poverty goals from the environmental goals. So in a way it is evolution from Rio, but based that you can't just address sustainability agenda if you forget poverty agenda, that poverty is not just extreme poverty.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Okay, I have a question for Mr. Piebalgs, and I think please allow me to point out the incoherence in your speech. So you spoke about the difference of citizens' perception and the economic reality. You said that Latvia's membership it was largely beneficial, that from an economic point of view it was really successful for Latvia. And then you also spoke about the negotiation of the multi-annual framework, that it's mainly about the defense of national interests. And if you take the negotiations, during the negotiations, there are two main groups. The first group, the cohesion group, including Latvia, and then a second group in favour of budget cuts, led by Germany and the UK. And during the negotiations, Luxembourg had a quite, for Luxembourg, and I know the position quite well, and the position of Luxembourg was quite interesting, because they were much more neutral, because the government refused to reduce the benefits of European integration just in terms of simple in the calculus of financial contributions. So my question is, how European citizens can have a positive opinion of the European Union and European integration if European politics is only about defending national interests and fighting against each other. Of course, there's clearly a need to stay credible at European level, but shouldn't we speak much more about common interests and how we can cooperate in a much efficient and effective way instead of just pointing out national interests? Thank you.
Well, the short answer is they should trust more on the European Commission. No, I don't know. I really don't know. Perhaps Paul knows. I can't find out of this because it's a Europe. I would start with creating an income basis for European Union. The tax base on resource basis. But I assume that the other problem is that you pour resources from national budgets that you can use for it and then try to get some back. And the worst experience of this kind actually I have had in the energy. Because we got the money during the crisis for energy interconnections. And then the only things that member states were been interested, not what in changes in Europe, but how much I could get from this. And that was so painful because you said, well, but it's small amount of money, why you need it? But I believe that it is inevitable that to avoid this type of fights that poisons everything, you need to move to our tax base. Commission actually proposed it, but it was completely ignored by member countries, and I think it's wrong because they are cutting in their feet. So I would still say we need European tax base because then you start to think a bit different, not what is the difference you get. And And just to say, the figures are quite impressive. Just to say for Latvian citizens, I think from financial perspective, each of us, included not directly, will benefit from 3,000 euros. Just to demonstrate for one of the poorest country, Burundi, where I came, they for the same period from all donors together will get 350 euros. So just to demonstrate that also for development policy, we need somehow also to change the philosophy, because if we really to help countries to get out of poverty, we should be more serious about it. But they should be balancing. But that could be done only if you participate from different base of negotiations. In my opinion, you need your own income base. As long as you don't have the discussions are poisoned and the scars are staying, and you are not able to reform from the budget rebate. We ended up with Denmark's budget rebate. Congratulations to Denmark. And, condolences to Europe. So that's how you finish. But Paul, perhaps you could say.
Well, I really don't know what to say, particularly after the last remark. My remark maybe would be that the negotiations on the multi-annual financial framework is really the union at its worst. Because that is really fighting for ridiculously small amount of money. We know that the budget now will be 1% of GDP. It's nothing compared to the various challenges which we have before us. If real own resources would be a real possibility, that would help. But this being said, I really do think that the European Union in general is better than the picture which you get when we look at the negotiation on the multi-annual financial framework. And maybe I don't completely agree with your conclusion that you have 3 big member states that is laying down the general policy line, and the rest of us are fighting on close national interest. I think the picture is a bit more optimistic than that, and the example of Luxembourg is a real example despite the fact that Luxembourg is a very small country. It has had an enormous influence on development of the European Union, and not just in narrow Luxembourg terms. I basically think that my own country is the same. Of course, now we have also engaged in the battle with our rebate, but still I do believe that our main interest in the European Union is not what we get out of it in budgetary terms, but that how we can use the European Union to create the kind of world which we would like to see, both in Europe, but also on the international scale. I, for instance, think that one of the very negative consequences of the present euro crisis is that Europe is losing out on the international scale. Europe as an international actor is diminishing in importance. The fact that we tend to split up and move towards maybe a Europe in various speeds will not help that. Because if we are not united inside, what are we outside? That is an enormous difficulty. But I do think that outside the discussions of financial framework, that there are reflections in member states that tend to look a bit beyond their own tip of the nose and have these broader considerations in mind.
Well, just to thank you, I mentioned what means in my point big and small. Well, I was not trying to diminish the role of Denmark on any other EU member countries, not just to be very precise, but it's just observations that I have had.
We would just like to say thank you to both speakers for very, very interesting presentations and for a very interesting debate here in the room. So thank you for attending. We have a small something from the college, a small memory from this. And we would also like to thank our sponsors for the support for both this conference and the whole week in general. And as Mr. Ambassador said, small states can have influence by providing examples. So we will let Elina take the example, and she will lead the way to the foyer, where we will have some Swedish cake and some cinnamon rolls, as well as coffee. And we hope that you would like to join her.